What is the influence of the Iranian or Persian culture across Iran and Central Asia? This is kind of the main question that Richard Nelson Frye's body of work tried to answer through his life. Frye was one of the kind of pioneering scholars of Persian studies, both pre- and post-Islamic in the United States. He was born in 1920 in Birmingham, Alabama, and died in 2014 in Massachusetts. He was associated academically pretty much most of his life with Harvard University. But he had a very interesting life and wrote several books. Frye first became interested in Oriental studies by encountering Harold Lamb's 1932 book about Tamerlane. In his memoir, he writes, "By pure chance, when in high school in Danville, Illinois, on an autumn afternoon while walking from school to my father's Colonial movie theater where I worked as a ticket seller in the box office, a book in the window of the sole local bookstore caught my eye. Below the title, Tamerlane, the Earthshaker by Harold Lamb, appeared a horseman on his rearing steed, with a scimitar in his hand and a strange pointed helmet on his head. My curiosity was aroused, and without hesitation I stepped into the store and asked for the price of the book. In 1932, the first official, in quotation marks, year of the American Depression, $1 seemed a princely sum for a 12-year-old to pay for a book, but I had to have that volume. As it turned out, that book did not simply arouse my interest, it consumed me. Central Asia would be my life's goal, but just how remained unclear. In any event, academic life, mostly at Harvard University, would be my passion for the rest of my life. Frye's career got a jump start thanks to the Second World War. He had studied in 1938 during a summer session at Princeton University, where he had taken coursework in the Turkish language under a professor named Walter L. Wright, who later went on to head the Near East section of the Research and Analysis Department of the new Coordinator of Information. This was a basically intelligence position created prior to the Second World War in the United States. And Wright, this teacher of Frye's, was part of the staff of the director of the OSS, William Donovan, also called Wild Bill. While he was studying in 1941 at Harvard, this would be his third year of graduate school, where he was beginning work on his PhD dissertation. He had been initially courted to take up Japanese or Chinese training, as you know, this was in the months prior to Pearl Harbor, and the United States was not sure if it was going to war. But shortly after this initial offer, he was invited to join the OSS thanks to his Turkish professor Wright. And thereafter, he began training, and he was pretty much forced to be the man for the Afghan desk. And shortly thereafter, he was sent to Afghanistan after hostilities were officially declared between the United States and the Axis powers. He received some basic firearms training and cryptography and other kind of tradecraft. And then he was sent to Kabul, where he was officially to be a teacher, and he indeed was. He spent from 1941 to 1943 in Kabul, where he had a fairly difficult time, and he writes about this at length in his memoirs. It was not the easiest assignment. He writes, our house in Charinov, Newtown, where most of the foreigners lived, had a bathroom facing south with a bathtub and a wood-fueled hot water heater. There was a garden surrounded by high mud walls, as around all other houses, providing privacy from passers on the street. Just as suspected, the electric heater did not give enough heat to warm anything, so it was necessary to construct a sandali, or kursi, as it's called in Persia. This was a low table covered with a quilt under which a brazier of coals or an electric heater would be placed, and one or more persons would sit on cushions on the floor with legs and feet under the table. One could be roasting below the waist, but with nose and shoulders freezing. With wood so scarce and expensive, few non-official foreigners can maintain stoves to heat an entire house, much less a room. Many repairs in the house were needed, and workmen, carpenters, electricians, etc. were difficult to find, but gradually order came into our lives. Compared to Afghan houses elsewhere in the capital, our home was luxurious, and this is, of course, in Kabul, I should mention. After he had spent some time in Afghanistan, Frye was later reassigned to Turkey, where he initially was to be a teacher at Robert College, which is today Boğaziçi University, the public university in Turkey, and also still a private high school, Robert College. And there he encountered some scholars, notable scholars of the time, including Andreas Titsi, a pioneering Turkologist and Ottoman studies scholar. While in Istanbul, Frye had a fairly good time, although he was interviewed at one point by the Turkish secret police, who he says, were certainly aware of his purpose there. But he writes, quote, it was pleasant to ride in tram in the old city, usually not jammed full. So unlike Cairo, a good deal of time was spent with a Persian, Ismail Kushan, who was dubbing American films into Persian in Istanbul. At the time in Iran, there were no machines or studios for changing English soundtrack to Persian. His Mitra Film Co. was the first attempt to do this, the forerunner of a later distinguished film industry in Iran. If Kabul and Tehran had many foreign communities, they were nothing compared to Istanbul. Passports were too manifold. I met a white Russian girl with an American passport who could not speak English, and a Hungarian with a Spanish passport who could not speak Spanish. As Adnan Erzebey said, everyone is spying on his neighbor for various reasons. Since young Turks could not read Arabic letters in which the manuscripts were written, most of the librarians in the mosque libraries in town were aged Muslim foreigners. For example, the librarian of Hagia Sophia was from Badakhshan, Afghanistan, while the Köprülü library, I found an Uzbek from Bukhara. The many libraries of the city contain the largest collection of Arabic, Persian, and Turkish manuscripts in the world. Most of the librarians jealously guarded their treasures. It took many visits and cups of coffee to win their confidence in order to view a manuscript. Frye also met Mehmed Fuad Köprülü, a descendant of the Ottoman Köprülü family and an important figure in both early Republican Turkish politics and scholarship. And during a conversation with Frye, he and Frye reached the conclusion, quote, that the USA would have to shoulder the burden of Oriental studies until Europe recovered, and the establishment of an American Institute of Archaeology and Oriental Studies in Turkey was necessary. This later came to pass with the creation of the American Institute of Turkish Studies, in which I played a part. This here, I think, is an important thing to comment on briefly of why, the United States in particular became such a dominant, the dominant kind of place in Middle East or Oriental studies after the Second World War. And Frye, I think, is kind of alluding to this in the memoir based on this conversation with Kuperlu that really, the U.S. would have the resources to keep it going. And the situation in Europe, even before the war, the Oriental studies had kind of sometimes very minimal to no institutional support, or scholars had really no academic affiliation, even if they wanted it. Although it was still being done, especially at German universities before the end of the First World War. And I should also note that at this time, Frye, during the war, was indeed working on his PhD dissertation. This does not really figure in the memoirs very prominently, but he was translating a history of Bukhara from the medieval period by an author named Narshihi. But he doesn't really discuss this, and he doesn't really discuss many detailed features of his education during the war, which is perhaps understandable. But after the war, he returned to Harvard University, where he writes about the major changes that were underway, the somewhat kind of aristocratic atmosphere of Harvard diminished, although not entirely, and there were significant changes. The post-war period, as I briefly alluded to, created some significant transformations in the teaching of foreign languages, literatures, and history in the United States. This was the start of the kind of area studies disciplines. This would be, Middle East studies, East Asian studies, that kind of thing, where the idea was to train area specialists that would kind of know a little bit of everything. And then in these academic departments, you would have a mix of people from different disciplines. So you would have economists, anthropologists, historians working sort of in different ways, but on the same region. And Frye was sort of put to work at Harvard to help set up the Middle East Center. It was in 1950 when Frye's sort of publications really began, and this was when his doctoral thesis was published as a book. This is Narshihi's History of Bukhara, which was prepared for publication by the Medieval Academy of America. He also took up other duties. He was assistant secretary to the then new American Research Center of Egypt, among other things. In 1956, Frye's kind of teaching and scholarship changed a bit. This was when H.A.R. Gibb was hired by Harvard University to head their Middle East Center. Gibb was a very accomplished Arabist and scholar of Islamic history. And this is not something that Frye really discusses in his memoirs, but according to Richard Bulliet's obituary, Frye was not really very congenial or on very good terms with Gibb, and thereafter his kind of teaching tended to, and much of his studies tended to focus on pre-Islamic Iran and pre-Islamic Iranian languages. He said, quote, "Many students came to classes on Iranian religions and the history of Iran. Fewer enrolled in Avestan and Old Persian, and usually only one or two elected Pahlavi, that is Middle Persian, or Sogdian. Avestan was the favorite of students in linguistics, and they were interested in questions of grammar and phonetics above all else." Frye continued to teach at Harvard and traveled extensively until his retirement. Although, of course, due to the Iranian Revolution in 1979, that pretty much prohibited him from ever visiting Iran again. When he retired, though, he had moved to Tajikistan to retire from Harvard. That is, he moved to Tajikistan intending to take up a teaching post at a university there, but was present during the beginning of the Tajik Civil War in the early 1990s. He continued to write and publish until he died in 2014, where there was still even drama shortly before and after his passing away, as he had wanted to be buried in Isfahan. And unfortunately, due to some problems with the government of Iran, he was not able to be buried in Isfahan according to his wishes. Now that's an overview of his life. I could make a much longer video about Frye's life. It's really worthy almost of a mini series or something. But if you would like to read more about his life, I encourage you to check out his memoirs, Greater Iran. And I think the title of his memoirs kind of leads me into more of a kind of assessment of his work, although, maybe using assessment lightly. What were his main ideas? What did he kind of put forward in his scholarship? Frye, first of all, was a proponent of, as I may have mentioned earlier, kind of the Persianist thesis of history, that is, an idea of a kind of overarching Iranian culture based on the Persian language that covers a much wider expanse than just the kind of nation of Iran. He, in his Golden Age of Persia, where he covers chapters on pre-Islamic Persia and Central Asia, then the Islamic conquests and the Abbasids, and the kind of developments after the sort of during and after the Abbasids, kind of the flourishing of new Persian, the new Persian language, and then the rise of the sort of Turks in the region. His main thesis, and this has become very popular, and I think kind of has a lot to say for it, is the continuity of a Persian identity or Persian culture that has continuity going from all the way from sort of the ancient Persian Empire through the Sasanians, through the Islamic dynasties up to even the present. But as I said, a lot of Frye's scholarly interest was more focused on Central Asia. As we can see in the video here on the screen, we have his book Bukhara, The Medieval Achievement, and his PhD dissertation of Nar Shahi's history of the same city. And he also wrote a book, The Heritage of Central Asia, from Antiquity to the Turkish Expansion. Are these works still regarded today? What is their status? I think scholars would not really cite them, but I have a great deal of respect for Frye's work. I think he put forward a convincing case, and he certainly had a depth of knowledge to back it up. And I think his effort to imagine something sort of greater than just a sort of nation state kind of history applied to Central Asia and the Middle East is pretty commendable. And identifying the role of language in sort of unifying a geographic territory, even though the political situations have sort of greatly changed over the centuries. Frye was not sort of universally liked. One review from when his book that's on screen here, The Golden Age of Persia, came out, says occasionally Frye's remarks give support to interpretations that are no longer widely held among scholars. He seems to speak of Islam in something very like, quote, the religion of the desert sense, though elsewhere he writes, the old conception of Arabs pouring from the desert with the Quran in one hand and the sword in the other is gone forever. It never existed. And the reviewer goes on to say, similarly, he frequently draws between religious and political motivation distinctions which seem unreal in the context of medieval Islam. I think this is sort of understandable, wanting to, the reviewer at least wanting to critique his work. But the role Frye has in putting forward a vision and a solid body of work, I think, deserves our attention at least. Even if maybe we want to write the history of this region or write sort of a Persianist type history. Even if we don't cite Frye, I think he's very valuable just to read and respect. I mean, I think if nothing else, when I do these biographical videos, I think it's just to say, a lot of these older scholars deserve, respect, and they deserve to be remembered, especially someone like Frye, who contributed extensively to the field. He was one of the earliest kind of figures in Persian studies in the U.S. And I think Frye is also important because he was quite clearly a historian. Whereas, someone like Gibb that he interacted with, or Andreas Tietze, were more kind of linguistically oriented. Not that that's a bad thing, but there is value in a historical approach, and certainly that's what I personally prefer. That's what so I think we can also commend Frye for that. Frye's legacy lives on. There is at the University of California, Irvine. There is a Frye memorial fund for a lecture, and the scholar Richard Foltz, who is in some ways kind of Frye's successor. He's written a book about the Tajiks and written some other interesting work on Persian Central Asia. Gave a lecture in honor of Frye, the first memorial lecture, and I'll put a link to that. And Frye has, or Foltz, I should say, has a fairly measured kind of assessment of Frye. He respects him, but offers some, I think, even-handed criticisms of him. So it's worth watching that lecture and understanding Frye's legacy. So with that, I think I'll conclude here. Once again, I think any of these books are good reads that I have on screen, and his memoir, Greater Iran, is also very exciting. It doesn't have, like I've kind of said, his memoir doesn't have a lot of insights into, his research necessarily, or his kind of academic approach, but it's very entertaining, and he had quite an interesting personality. There's also a few videos on YouTube of him speaking, and he was quite the character. So, check those out as well. So, all right. Thank you for watching, and I will talk to you in the next video.